on the ground to get to what we're prioritizing, so.
Yeah.
Um,
I would also like to stress to anybody that's listening that we understand the importance of clearing as much as possible near places of worship, but to be patient because we also know when the times of worship are. And so it may appear that we're not touching it, but they definitely make sure that it's clear in time for services.
So I think the most critical question left is the most controversial one. Are we good with windrowing to the center of the street?
Do you know
I guess
the other
I'll-
option?
Yeah, is there,
That's,
as opposed
Well, you can push it up against cars on the outside of the street.
That's a terrible
the trouble
idea.
is when you push it to the outside, then you're trapping people's vehicles in their driveways oftentimes.
Yeah. And it does make it more difficult for emergency services if they have to respond to somebody's house to get somebody out to an ambulance or whatever. You know, I think that maybe in the plan I could prioritize areas that as soon as the storm is over and they're ready to start, they can start clearing windrows in certain areas, not throughout the entire town, but, you know, for instance, at the post office, it's great to make sure that there's plenty of room for people to get in out there, or at the banks or the library, you know, because, you know, when you have a lot of cars parked on the side of the road,
I'll be honest with you
sometimes
about
stick out.
that, I think that's just overkill. Like, I think our guys prioritize that in a way that's, like, writing it down is not going to, it's just gonna hold us to something that maybe this snowstorm, it's a priority over here, but next one,
Sure.
this, you know, maybe the storm's on a Sunday morning, so we don't really care about what's going on at the bank, but we really care about other parts of town or what have you, so.
Okay.
I just wanted everyone to kind of say it out loud, so when someone asks about the windrowing to the middle,
Yeah.
we have it kind of stated, so. Any other questions?
I think generally the plan is a very good one. I think probably going above and beyond the call of duty compared to some communities, but I actually appreciate that. So, good job.
Thanks.
I think we should have formalize it.
I move to approve the snow removal plan with the changes made.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the snow removal plan with the appropriate changes. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the review and discuss the stormwater ordinance. Chris, would you like to come up?
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, we have Chris Stone, engineer. And the HDR has been working on the stormwater modeling for the town for about 6-7 months. And then ultimately we'd asked them to put together some draft ordinances, which they're still working on. So the plan that the ordinance you're looking at is very much of a rough draft. It had my comments into it, and then they were going to address some of my comments. And then I thought that it would be good to kind of give you guys at least a first look at it before you ultimately see a formal presentation and so forth. The original intent was to replace the existing plan, which is a combination. The ordinance was written in 1986, was approved in 1986. And it's a combination of sanitary sewer and storm sewer, and effectively it commingles stormwater runoff or surface water runoff with sanitary sewer. and theoretically it transports stormwater to the wastewater lagoons on the north side of Lodgepole Creek. And our goal in the sanitary world is to minimize the amount of treatment of water, because the more water that goes over there, you have plain but dirty water that goes into there, it increases your cost of wastewater treatment significantly. So that's kind of where this whole thing started, was separating out the two ordinances. I'm working on the sanitary sewer ordinance, HDR is working on the storm sewer ordinance. A couple things I want to at least bring to your attention was the concept of storm sewer is most of the town has been built. And they did a model of everything south of Highway 30, everything south of the interstate. Most of your water comes from the Bluffs, goes through town, goes underneath the interstate, goes through town, goes underneath Highway 30, goes underneath the railroad tracks, goes north through Greg Gross's field, and then ultimately into what we call the North Wells area. When they did their initial model, we barely had the capacity to treat what's called the 2-year 24-hour runoff, which is a flood event or a rainfall event that has a 98% probability of occurring every year. You know, we had a bunch of really wet areas over there by Market and 3rd, and Blair and 4th, and that general area is just where standing water happens whenever we have a major runoff event. You know, they modeled what they call the 2-year event, the 5-year event, the 10-year event, 25-year event, and the 100-year event.
For a 24-hour?
For 24-hour, yeah. And those have been fairly standard for most municipal stormwater plans, and generally most towns, I'm using Cheyenne as my example, will try to design for the 10-year event, you know, but they want to make sure that emergency vehicles can move across streets during the 100-year event, and there's a minimum amount of flood damage. So one of the decisions I'm going to be asking the council to make, and you don't need to be making that tonight, is right now, you know, we probably have, you know, if you design everything in town ordinance-wise for the 2-year event, you'd still fail about 5 or 7 existing culverts. If you're designed for the 25-year event, you would probably be failing conveyance under existing conditions in town for about 30 culverts, you know, and then it gets progressively worse for the 100-year design. Very few towns ever designed for the 100-year event. Salt Lake City, I remember, was when I was working in there in the 1980s, during that really big spring we had of 1984, they were flooding all over under the 10-year conditions. So the decision you as a council will be asked to make will be, you know, how much investment are we going to put into the existing town to bring it up to speed to whatever ordinance we decide to go with. You know, my initial recommendations from the town engineer standpoint is 10-year conveyance and treatment is probably the most reasonable we can deal with, and trying to make sure that the streets are clear again from an emergency vehicle perspective for the 100-year event. You know, that would be my goal. You know, I think Kim and I were talking, she's thinking maybe the 25-year event, but again, this, you know, I've asked HDR to kind of give me a cost benefit, you know, because we have to prioritize within the existing town where we want to go with for design events. Typical issues are conveyance, which are culverts and ditches. You know, you'll generally have a minor storm where you can convey a minor storm, like the 2-year event, you know, in your ditches, and then it probably overtops. But the big concern is let's have no major flooding on the 10-year or the 25. This is again we're going to go back to you on. The issue for the major storm event is what it can pass with minimum damage. Like during a 100-year event in the city of Cheyenne, they try to make sure that you have no more than 6 inches of water on major arteries and 12 inches of water on minor arteries and cross streets and so forth. So that kind of gives you a little idea there. You try to minimize damage to properties, but I've seen water go down people's driveways and, flood their houses. So those are issues that we would try to address in this ultimate ordinance. As we go from there, the issue would be is new development. And a couple questions I've got for the council on the issues of new development. And I think certainly you don't want to make a major onus on new development, but certainly with industrial, I've driven around town and I've seen areas where I've seen, runoff from parking lots in facilities, where I've actually seen fertilizer and so forth moving into the town storm drainage. So we want to make sure that on industrial lots that they contain and treat their own runoff. And that's what this ordinance is designed to say.
So, just,
Go ahead.
so that's the second time with treatment. So currently our drainage ends at our new development. Like, I think it's supposed to cross the road, it just kind of does whatever it wants to when it gets down there. But currently, we are not treating anything.
No, basically, we have what, you guys have signed as an ordinance called or basically our source water protection plan. So any and typical stormwater contamination can be sediment, and that's certainly nothing that's gonna be hazardous to our wells. But nitrates, fertilizers, manure, things like that could be hazardous. So that'd be the area where this ordinance addresses that as deleterious substances. It's saying do not discharge deleterious substances to our stormwater system. So you're right, Mayor, is that the current system, once the water gets into a ditch, the only treatment is attenuation. Eventually it soaks into the ground. When you look at how flat it is going across Bill Gross's field, and the amount of water that actually makes it from town across that field, across North Beach, is probably fairly minimal, at this stage. There is, if you go all the way to the northeast part of the North Wells, there is about a 8-10 foot head cut, erosion feature off of Lodgepole Creek. So historically, that water did go diagonally across the North Wells property, but 30 years worth of plowing and irrigation circles and so forth probably slowed some of that water down. That head cut out would probably predate the development of Kimsey's fields there. But treatment-wise, in the stormwater world, we talk about treatment as detention, where we build ponds that store the water, settle out the solids, and then ultimately discharge it. And a lot of times you can use those stormwater ponds for soccer fields, for things of that nature, parks. Anytime you let the water rest is really effectively stormwater detention. And then that does treat the water, but it treats it for non-hazardous stuff, non-deleterious stuff. Mayor, did I answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
partially, but I'll ask the rest.
Okay, sounds good. The goal here in the new development is really, effectively, in my mind, most of the current town is developed. So the question is, what can you do retroactively in treatment? And that's this issue where, depending on the sort of grants that Kim and I can get for the town, and there are stormwater grants available, I think we have to look at a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan to upgrade the existing parts of town to meet whatever our long-term goals decide to be. You know, I understand now with and Brandon did get a copy of the Highway 30 plans going through town, and they are looking at replacing 2 36-inch culverts with 3 6-foot by 4-foot box culverts underneath Highway 30. So they're going way out of their way to carry the town's water underneath Highway 30. The next problem is the UP Railroad, because that, you know, I mean, has never been maintained. There's 3 36-inch barrels, but when I looked at them last, they're full of culverts or full of tumbleweed, sediment, and everything else. So that's really going to be the next issue of getting the town's water underneath the tracks. And then ultimately, as we get it through Gross's Field and goes into North Wells, you know, part of the North Wells design that we being HDR are currently doing includes storm drainage, you know, which is culverts, sizing, and I think they're using a 25-year and 100-year sizing for all the culverts there. And they're using for their estimate on their design of those culverts, you know, basically they're modeling the impervious area of a house's roof, you know, a typical driveway and so forth. They're making an estimate of what sort of runoff comes off that development and goes through. But all the storm drainage will be built under the current planning that's in place, which is ditches, culverts. I think they're planning a detention pond on the very northeast end of things before the water goes into Lodgepole Creek. I think that the concept between this ordinance now is for any new development coming in is to make sure that there is a plan in place for individual lots so that that water does not go, you know, that the lot's water is directed towards the designed drainage ditches, culverts, and so forth. And that's pretty much what the intent is here. My brief conversations, Mr. Mayor, yeah, I think there's some areas where there needs to be some improvement on that. But generally, a developer, when they develop a subdivision, you know, has an overall grading plan so that all the lots grade, you know, to the west, to the east, you know, whatever, towards our main drainage. But our main flow is from the southwest to the northeast through this area, and eventually everything drains towards Lodgepole Creek. You know, so that's kind of the quick and dirty on this, and I know you have had not a lot of time to look at it, and you will get a more formal presentation at the October 23rd meeting, I think it is, from HDR. But I'd like to take any of your comments today back to HDR and at least get those addressed, so.
Well, I don't know if you want to go through it piece by piece, but I mean, I could start with section 3. Article 2, section 3. It's a bit hard for me to understand, I guess. What the approval process really looks like, because like under section 3, it's like they need approval of construction plans before the town will issue a grading permit prior to construction of drainage improvements. So who's doing the initial permit?
I think the intent of that statement is that there is a developer involved with the overall development, and that we aren't just looking at individual lots, we're just basically looking at grading the development which would be the sum of the individual lots towards the place. And I think that's probably a question, I think, for you, which is, the idea would be as we start looking at those plans, and I think HDR put in, it's gotta be scale of a map 1 to 40, 2-foot contours and so forth, so you can actually see what's going on with it, so you don't end up having a haphazard development, but you're trying to get everything flowing in a defined direction. And that approval on a development standpoint would be within the town, and then the individual lots would have to be able to conform to that town's approval
So-
of development.
So that's my question, I guess, and maybe it can be better explained later, but if we're having the 1 to 40 and the data points and all of that stuff, who's responsible to produce those data points?
Generally, the town right now has existing conditions mapping, which we can make available to any developer, and our scale is 1 to 40 2-foot contours. So with respect to everything within the city limits, we have it all mapped. Laramie County has actually done LiDAR at that same level scale for the entire county. So the mapping is readily available. So the developer, when he develops and says, I'm gonna put this guy's house on a 10-foot hill and this guy's house on a 4-foot hole, he's gonna have to work within the framework of that existing conditions mapping.
Well, I'd just like to reiterate my concern that we may not be dealing with developers. We may
Right.
be dealing with an individual who buys a lot
Right.
and hires a builder who now has, it's one thing to permit this process when you're building 20 homes, but
Right.
if you're building one, what does that look like? I'm not even saying it looks bad, I just don't really know what that looks like and what the general flow through of those are and what it may or may not add to the price of new home construction on a potential lot.
No, and just to the rest of the council, we had a little bit of discussion beforehand, and I think the mayor's concern is a very valid concern, which is, and I remember I can't remember what the name of the street is up, where we had a new house going in, up by Well 5 and so forth, but it's up there. I think from a standpoint of an individual lot, I think that within this document, we talk about 2,500 square feet, 3,000, and so forth. I think that's where we need to adjust these plans, because I think you can look at it with the amount of impervious area, because if you've got a 2.5 acre lot for a home, but you only have, a 3,000 square foot house, going onto it and a driveway, there could be easily an exception or a waiver to that, recognizing that there ought to be, at least as part of the waiver process, saying, hey, Mr. Smith, drain away from Lodgepole Creek and move towards this is our existing storm drainage. I think there can easily be, for smaller components, a process that requires your builder or your developer or your individual to still come to the town, but at least Lauren or Kim or whoever can say, we've got an existing 18-inch culvert there. I want you to be draining, and all our drainage is going to the east. Let's make that work. But there could be a waiver for individual residences.
Here's a question that I've got. Let's say you do have individual lot sales, and the town's gonna permit a home on a lot. We should have some method to look at that lot and say, this house needs to be so many inches above grade so that they aren't taking on water at a 2-year, 5-year, whatever year event. And they ought to be, and we have a lot of houses in town that that on 2-year events, they take on water simply because they were built too low. And so where do we get, how does the town in the permitting process look at that and say, yes, we will permit this house to be built, but it's gotta be built 18 inches above grade.
Right.
You'll have to bring in X amount of fill to bring it up to grade and to get it in a reasonable scenario.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, because, I mean, there's kind of two parts to that question is, you know, one is, by the time this project is done with, we will have what's called a stormwater management model, SWIM model of the town. And you can kind of see where the low areas are, where the water backs up, you know, and so forth. So we'll have that as a tool that's going to be available to the town. You know, as you look at a new development, you know, and I'll use North Wells as an example, you know, you really want to at least have some sort of master plan so that every one of those houses, or, you know, if the first guy there builds his house on a 10-foot hill, you know, all his runoffs can go to the neighbors, and those lots haven't been sold yet, you know. You've got to have a way to control that end of things. So that's having a master plan, you know, for the whole development. We need to have that in mind. I think that the HDR plan, just because we know where the culverts are going to be now, we know what their elevations are going to be, we should have a pretty good handle. We know where the current 100-year flood that Laramie County has mapped on Lodgepole Creek. So we know from a standpoint of river flooding, you know, which lots are of concern, which lots are not. And then there are rules within river flooding that we have to abide by, which is we cannot place fill, you know, within that, you know, below what's called the ordinary high water line of the creek. You know, and the set of plans that HDR and Stantec put together do address that, where they're not changing the existing Laramie County approximate study for the 100-year flood. But we should know, I mean, I think my gut feeling as town engineer would be is that the grading should be for any normal house, you know, you need to be grading away from the foundation, and that water needs to be running off towards, you know, a defined ditch or drainage. You know, and truly you don't want to be sitting there putting somebody on a hillside, so that's gonna be so if there's not a master plan, I think we're gonna have more issues than we would like. So I really would promote that there's a overall drainage master plan for the development. And so if you do end up, you know, selling lots to individual developers, you know, they need to comply to the master plan. And what I would think is that every lot owner comes to town and says, I want a waiver, my house is less than, 10,000 square feet or whatever that number is gonna be. And then at this stage of the game, the town can say, we'll grant you the waiver, but you need to be aware that your house needs to drain to the south or to the north, or whatever cardinal direction it would be.
So just to back up a little bit on that, so I don't remember the size of the other ones, but virtually every lot out there now would apply to a level 4.
And that's
What I would say is level 4, but anyway, it indicates a drainage impact study.
Right.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah, that's what I think you're talking about, Article 5, the levels of study.
Yeah.
That's what I think we need to rewrite. You are correct in that if not every lot, but there are a number of lots that are 1, 2, 3 acres, you know, and the acres 43,000 square feet, so that would automatically put you into
Well, this
the third
applies
level.
This applies to anything over 20,000 on new.
Right, that's why I say we need to rewrite that, to start talking about impervious area.
Here's what I'd like you to think about, and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to cut you off, but I understand the concerns, and I understand where we're trying to head, but for from my standpoint, I think about it, I guess, a bit like this. If we go into a plan with the plan being that we're gonna grant waivers to everyone, then it's no plan at all. It's like whatever way the wind blows of the people who are up here, that's how it's gonna go. And I'm not sure that's fair to citizens who permit today versus permitting 6 years from now. Like, I'm just concerned that if we go into it planning on granting waivers, that's a really bad idea.
Yeah, and the only thing I would want to be aware of would be is the whole North Wells development is, 200, the whole Kimsey Purchase is 318 acres. So theoretically, you got 300 acres of land that could be developed there. Generally, if we had one developer doing that 318 acres, I would have no trouble with a level 4. I mean, you're gonna have to do a complete
Sure.
drainage study. I would think we still need to have a complete drainage study for each individual industrial lot, just because there's more pavement there than, they're gonna have parking lots, they're gonna have, everything else. So I think they do need, I think the industrial users would need, a drainage study. When you get into the residential areas, is I think there still should be a master plan for all 30 residential lots in the North Wells area. And I think the town's current work will address the initial phase of that master plan, because we've already done storm drainage for that development, we being HDR has. Now, within the framework of that master plan are individual homes, 2.5 acres to 3/4 of an acre down the line. And that's what I was thinking of, trying to figure out a way that we can require something, some compliance, and maybe we'll call it a waiver, but they still need to and if the town is not gonna grade everybody's lot for them, then we need to at least have some means to explain to the homeowner that thou shalt grade it to the south or the, whatever direction that's can be.
Sure.
So that's what I'd like to do, is I'll try to think that, a way to do that, but I think we still have to have some means to require a grading compliance, or else you're just gonna have a mishmash of, people back and forth and things, So I agree with you from a standpoint of, we don't need a level 3 study for every individual home that, requires a, hydrology, hydraulics, and transport, but we do need an overall plan in place for the whole development.
Any other?
So, my notes here, Mr. Mayor, are certainly, Article 5 needs to be rewritten to the point where we can kind of get that characterized better.
Is there a portion in here that talks about that I can't find it, and for some reason I didn't mark it, but is there a portion where it asks, or where it states that you can't calculate percolation into your runoff control?
There's a portion there talking about dry wells.
Yeah.
And what a dry well is, it's where typically, a dry well is typical from a standpoint of industrial users, that instead of letting your runoff leave the area, it goes directly into a hole filled with rock. It's like a French drain, but it's effectively a vertical dry well. The problem with those are, you also deal with out of sight, out of mind for contaminants. And I would not be in favor of that from a stormwater. We have a very shallow, all of our rural wells are highly susceptible to contamination. And any dry wells that we were to allow, it would have the potential for bringing surface water, contaminated surface water, directly into groundwater. So there is somewhere in there, that talks about dry wells, and I think it's in, it's towards the end. Yeah, Article 8. It says percolation, dry wells, or direct infiltration shall not be considered as appropriate methods for industrial stormwater discharge, and is strictly prohibited by the town of Pine Bluffs. So that was kind of the language I actually threw into there, and that was more of a groundwater protection standard. Now, homes, and I don't know if we have that situation here, but, my situation at the ranch is, I've got a French drain around my foundation, because foundation of my house is below the water table, and I'd be popping water into my basement every spring of the year. So, and this allows French drain design. It just does not allow dry wells. So, and I don't think we have a lot of homes below the water table here, but if the water table ever comes back up to 1920 standards, we would, so.
So as long as we're talking about section 8, I'm not trying, if somebody wants to jump in, feel free, but on section 8, it's the first part where it says all current and new industrial development. So, first of all, it appears that we're going to go claw back on people with, which may or may not be the appropriate thing to do, but I'm curious, anyone who's zoned in a commercial area, I guess we're going to assume that how are we going to know, do we have a different set of standards for someone who's building a, warehousing facility of feathers? It's something very harmless on industrial property versus someone who's using chemicals. Like the same standard applies to all those folks?
Then again, the idea of submitting a plan gives you, the town, the flexibility to review the plan. So if it's a daycare, or a warehouse of feathers, you would probably address that one differently. But you also have to still look at it as if they're to sell that warehouse of feathers to, a hazardous waste site 20 years from now. You want, when there's a change in land use, you want to be able to address that. So I think it just gives the town the flexibility to evaluate that. I mean, I know in Albany County, I was looking at regulations for stables. And this is out in the county, not in the city of Laramie. And that became a very controversial issue, was how many horses can be in a stable. Could be 3 horses, could be 30 horses. And so that's still being debated by the Albany County Commissioners on, but their concern was, so much of the county water, stormwater runoff from facilities goes into the Casper Aquifer, which serves the entire town of Laramie. So I think we would look at it a little differently here in Pine Bluffs, but you still have got, the nature of, and the reason I had, and again, it wasn't me, this was Brandon, but I think the reason they had current was it'd be really nice for us to have the opportunity to look at, some current conditions. The question really from a standpoint of city council is, if they show us the current conditions, there is no grading, everything just kind of sinks into the ground or goes into our stormwater runoff. Are these facilities grandfathered? this ordinance is saying, no, they're not grandfathered, and you can do something about it. You know, and that's probably a question for Alex, on legal, is can we go backwards at existing facilities? You know, and do you want to, as a council, do you want to go backwards at existing facilities? So that's a great question, and I don't know what the answer is on that. You know, as an engineer, I'd like to. I've got the stormwater protection plan to protect my wells, but it does require us to, you know, treat everybody the same and say that all current industrial facilities are subject to our review.
Well, yeah, it's a tougher calculation, I guess. I just think about a potential, you know, like a potential grain facility. So they're held to the same standard. They have to collect 100% of their runoff on site with a treatment method before it can be released into our natural flow. I don't know what that treatment would look like, but according to this, they would have to calculate the roofs of the grain bins and the square footage of concrete, and they'd have to be able to capture that amount during a 10-year, 25-year rain event.
Yeah, and to me, as when reviewing the plan, you know, I would look at it and say, well, if all that's being, the only contamination is fertilizer would be grain, you know, I think, you know, grass and a detention pond could attenuate that. If it's something more hazardous, and that's where the second part of that was, no runoff of deleterious materials will be allowed off-site. You know, such materials shall not be allowed to commingle with the town's stormwater system. And that's the second paragraph, last sentence. And that one really is directed to say that we don't want, you know, bad materials. If your only contaminant is a little bit of sediment or grain, you know, I'm not gonna worry about that. You know, but I mean, that last sentence is when that really, to me, was the one that I felt was critical for our own protection.
So I promise I have one last thing, and then I'll quit hassling you and let them hassle you.
It's not a hassle. I mean, this is what I'm looking for,
So Article 10, Section 1. Can you clarify that for me?
What the original plan that HDR put together was putting the onus of the maintenance, you know, that every new developer would be responsible for developing culverts, stormwater ponds, and everything else. And the original plan that HDR had was that they would have the long-term responsibility for that, and to maintain that. I felt, with my experience with developers and development, that I would rather have the town take over all maintenance after 1 year. And the first, you know, if we're gonna approve the culverts, we're gonna approve the detention ponds, theoretically, we're smart enough to approve a well-designed system. But counting on some developer who may move to New York City, you know, after he gets done developing in Pine Bluffs, I said, it's not, you know, I've seen too many developers go belly up and change their names. So I'd rather sit there and after 1 year have a full-time easement under private property and to be able to maintain that. So Lauren can go there and clean the culverts out. So.
Yeah, so I guess I could potentially understand the culvert thing, but I guess my question about this would be just what we discussed. So if I am on a industrial property and I build enough storage to handle my runoff, and I do all the things we're saying we're going to do, now it's saying that after 1 year, the town of Pine Bluffs is going to be responsible for my for my retention pond, do we want to be responsible for someone's retention pond?
Well, assuming we go with the fact that it's no deleterious materials, you know, we aren't detaining junk, you know, we aren't detaining crummy materials. I think the town, I mean, I would rather have the town maintain that detention pond, because that detention pond is protecting the town's downstream system, you know, and so I'd want to make sure that, you know, if they haven't been maintaining it, the grass grows 8 feet high, and so on and so forth, and nobody's taking responsibility for it, suddenly that 10-year, 24-hour detention volume that we thought we had there is now 2-year detention volume. And it's kind of like, I know we can't even begin to play with the UP Railroad, but the fact that those culverts are not maintained underneath the railroad, to me, means that that water will then back up, you know, across the highway and then ultimately, you know, into town. So if we had control of that, we'd just be maintaining it ourselves, you know. But you're right, it's additional cost to the town, and that's why I wanted to talk to you guys
Well,
about
and-
that, but that was my logic.
I understand what we're trying to do, and I think we're in many ways heading in the right direction. There's these little things that keep coming up that I wonder. For instance, on this, there's a responsibility to cut grass and mow weeds and do all of those things. Well, if I go out on a 2.5 acre parcel and I build a house towards the back end of it, and we say you have to bring your runoff to, you know, to the street or to the road, and it has to make its way down there, now just bear with me, and it's 500 foot back there to where we start a drainage ditch on private property, and now it's our responsibility 37 times over to maintain that drainage ditch out to the road.
Yeah, and I think if I were the town, if that tall weedy grass has no impact on the neighbors, you know, I as a town would not bother to maintain, I wouldn't go to the point of
Okay.
forcing maintenance.
But you gotta
But
think
it-
about it
but-
the other way
yeah.
too. This is also a document that says you will maintain
Right.
it, is all
Yeah.
I'm saying. Like,
No, and that's a good, and I think your point's good. I mean, I'm just trying to think of how to rate that, but the goal would be as a town is, you know, I mean, it's just like turning valves. I mean, we need to have a valve turning program. We need to have a stormwater inspection program. So every spring, we make sure that our culverts are clean, you know, or at least 100 of our culverts are clean. And then the next year we do another 100 or whatever that's gonna be. But we need to, as a town, you know, be able to make sure our ditches can convey water. And that includes ditches that may originate on private property. But again, if the only guys who get flooded is the guy who isn't mowing the grass, I personally wouldn't care less, you know, but that's, you know, our guys, Lauren's gotta be knowledgeable enough that, you know, I'm not gonna waste time on that guy's ditch. But as soon as that ditch, you know, floods the next door neighbor's property, you know, then we have an issue, you know. But I think that needs a rewrite, I agree with you. We don't wanna have a situation where we're telling people to mow their lawns, just for the sake of mowing lawns. But we have to have some way that we can maintain conveyance over the long term.
it really feels to me like and I don't know a way out of it, and, you know, I guess it would be better if we all came up with a great plan, but like we have this, it's not really confusion, it's like for lack of a better way to do it, what we're going to end up doing is applying developer standards to individual, like,
Right.
and it doesn't really matter whether it's a house or or a warehouse building or anything, like we're applying standards for a business park development to someone who buys one piece of property to put his or her one thing on. Like, I'm not sure of a better way, I'm just saying it feels like we're applying this like grand standard of a big developer who's going to invest a lot of money. And therefore, this doesn't seem that cumbersome, and we're gonna kind of apply that to individual landowners, which is
Right.
maybe the only way it can be done, but I don't know.
Yeah. I
No,
don't know.
go ahead.
No, I don't know the mechanism to fix that, but I would like to find a way where we make this easier, have less focus on the development, and make this easier on what we're trying to attract, which we know we probably will attract, because at this point, we don't have a lot of developers looking to take on the whole project. So what we know we'll likely be up against is selling these lots to individuals. And I would like to see a way to make this a little less cumbersome, and it seems like it could get expensive. So to find a way to take some of that burden off of individuals.
No, and I think I hear what you're saying, and I think that there's gotta be, I'll try to look at this and meet with Brandon Noble on this, because I think that your points are well taken. I do think with respect to our new development at North Wells, the fact that we, the town, are designing the stormwater infrastructure as part of the project, including the roads, ditches, culverts. So I think we're ahead of the game there, and we just have to find a way to dogleg the individual lot developments into that overall master plan. We do have a master plan for that development. And then the next development that comes in, that may be in the southeast portion of North Wells, we may have to figure out a way to make sure that if we don't have a developer there, we, the town, to provide our, again, that's our property, that 318 acres is our property. So what we need to do is make sure that it's developed intelligently. And like, I agree with you, we don't want to put the burden on, the individual homeowners. And if we don't have some massive developer coming in there saying, I'm gonna buy this whole thing from you guys, we have to be prepared to sit there and work with these homeowners to make sure that they can work within that framework. And so I think it's a great point. I'll try to, in the next draft that you'll see, we'll try to get that addressed, because I think that's a really good point. I do want you to, I am interested in your position on, can you go backwards? This is maybe, and I can talk to Alex, but this may be an Alex question. Can you actually go to existing properties and make them comply with an ordinance that doesn't get passed until 2023? I mean, that's, because we put it in there on the basis that I see some problems we have today. And I'd love to be able to get a handle on those problems. And our only alternative is to call DEQ and expect DEQ to do something about it, which I can tell you from experience doesn't happen. So we at the town have got to have a way to put some teeth behind it.
I would agree, I think that's a question for Alex.
Yeah.
Probably whether it's something we want or not, we would need to know
Yeah,
it's even a thing.
yeah.
It seems like on the new development though, if the streets are laid out properly and all of your master plan is executed properly, then that really minimizes the impact of someone's 2,500 square foot home on the property draining to. It should basically be able to drain to the street, and the streets and the town's infrastructure system should be able to handle the drainage, and if it doesn't, it means it's not, the town didn't design
Right.
the streets or the master plan properly. And so, I don't understand where the drainage study on the individual basis of each individual lot comes in when that really should be being addressed now in the layout of the roads, the layout of the drainage of the whole development as a unit.
Yeah, the only, and I can use another example, is, and you're right, I mean, and the original stormwater design that HDR has done to date, that's part of the current plans, is they assume so much impervious area per 30 lots and per industrial. So yeah, the current plan, if it's designed correctly, will convey the water from all those lots. The situation that I've seen in my career has been where, over the course of my 2.5 acre lot, you know, I take a dozer and I want to build a bigger hill, so I'm looking down at my neighbors or whatever that's going to be. And then they actually change the natural runoff, because the stormwater plan that you have today reflects the natural runoff from each of these individual lots. You know, so if somebody goes contrary to the natural runoff and, you know, builds a 1-to-1 slope, you know, down to Lodgepole Creek, that slope's gonna gully and it's gonna erode, you know. Or if they turn all their water to the east and the natural flow should have been to the west. That would be the only exceptions where I can see that, you know, the current HDR plan may not accommodate that, which allowing us to review the grading plan for a 2.5 acre lot, you know, but not requiring an engineer certification. It should be just pure common sense, saying, you know, you don't want to do something dumb, you know.
Wouldn't that be something that should be addressed during the permitting process of the
Yep.
new whatever that's happening on that property?
Correct.
And if they're showing that, oh, here's what I'm gonna do, and it's gonna alter the master drainage plan, you say, no, you can't build it like that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so you're back to number one, the town has the responsibility of looking at what they're proposing to do and approving it or not approving it.
Right. But not requiring, yeah, I think what this current document was requiring for these phase 1, phase 2, or what do you call them? They had to do detailed rational hydrology studies and, you know, hydraulics, and I agree is, you know, I think the town can review a grading plan as part of their building permit, and you can make that decision pretty easily. And if it's super complicated, then you can bring in somebody like me or whoever and say, hey, what are we doing here?
Right. I would agree that a grading plan at minimum is great. As everyone here can attest, we get a lot of building permits that are one-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no, like, and frankly, most of the time it's a fence or something very harmless, but we have let structures, you know, and I'm sure pretty much every structure over the years come through without any idea of what they're doing with the land around what they're proposing to build. I mean, maybe, I wouldn't know, less than 10%, I would say, have come through with any real plan about what their lot is going to look like when it's completed. And so just having that, I think, would be, you know, maybe it doesn't have to be a grading plan of the entire 2.5 acres, but it needs to show what elevation that looks like above.
Okay, well, if anybody has, I mean, I know you guys had a lot of time to look this over, so, but if you got any comments.
My problem was I had
Good.
too much time this morning to look it over, so I thought of a lot of
Well, send me your notes too, so, I am more than happy to convey this to, HDR because this is draft one. You looked at it after I reviewed it, so this is actually their second draft. You really would not have liked the first draft, I guarantee that, so. But I think we can get this thing toned down to the point where it's a reasonable document, so. But send me your comments, that'd be great, so, good.
Any other things?
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, thanks, yeah.
All right, do we have any visitor comments?
Am I a visitor?
Sure.
Okay, while the topic, Todd, just a few general comments with regard to the discussion we've just had. And it really gets into the philosophy of governance. Essentially, a governing body views and reviews and looks at critically any law that's being made from three primary perspectives. The highest and most important perspective is the public interest. And most of your comments tonight, I think, fall into that category. The science, the engineering, that goes into an ordinance that is based primarily in scientific thought is informative and elucidative of what the public interest may be, but it never trumps the public interest. Public interest has to be supreme because that's where the power comes from. It's derived from the public, from the people out there that are going to have to deal with this. So I think the questions I heard were philosophically well-based. The second level is the standpoint of we have public interest, but we also have public policy. And that gets into the question of administrative action and how do we actually administer this thing? I mean, does it mean, does it require additional staff? Does it require contracting out for engineering services to review things like the county does? Are those funds expended in pursuit of administrative functions more worthy than other purposes for which those funds could be put? That kicks you up into the public interest again. But you do have to think about who's going to do it, who's going to enforce it, how's it going to be administered. And then the bottom level is kind of my bailiwick, and that is, okay, how am I going to enforce this thing? What measures do we have available that we can rely on as a municipal government to require compliance and to sanction non-compliance? That's kind of a whole nother can of worms, and I don't want to get too deep into it at this point. I will tell you that Wyoming courts and courts generally have not been favorably disposed toward ex post facto legislation. And one classic example of that is the planning department in the city of Cheyenne that is constantly seeking to enforce the Unified Development Code against properties that were in compliance prior to its adoption in 2008. And yet they go back and constantly seek to penalize those people who complied with the law, but now that a new ordinance came along, a new code came along, they want to penalize them for not being in compliance with something that they didn't have available at the time. Sooner or later, somebody's going to get ticked off enough to take them to court over that, and I think there's a strong likelihood that portions of the Unified Development Code will be found to violative of that principle and will probably be thrown out. So I would strongly recommend that this be, in the context of prospective legislation and not, burden property that's already in place with compliance. That's gonna be a nightmare. So those are my thoughts. I don't quibble with the science. But I do think that science is only a fraction of the consideration. And so, I think the challenge for the governing body is balancing all the competing interests, the monetary outlay, the benefit derived by doing something here compared to doing something elsewhere. And, when you put all that together and mix it up, it sounds like you've got a pretty good handle on it, and it's gonna take some interesting dialogue to get it all resolved.
Thanks, Alex. Any questions for Alex on it? I think that's good info. Department reports. Oh yeah, he was visitor comment, and then he's gonna be a department report also. Jana, do you have anything?
Couple things. So the senior center had their annual, meeting and board election day. Dima and, Janice were, re-elected. They served 91 for lunch and 40 attended the meeting. Their board currently is as follows. Dima, Janice, Lori, Franny, and Jerry are their current board members right now. The other thing I had isn't really a department report, just kind of a general concern I've heard. Is that road that goes up to like where Bubba lives, is that 10th up
Yes.
there?
East End, yeah.
I've just had complaints from several people about how quickly some residents up there are going down and up the road to where it's like dangerous for how narrow it is. And they had asked if there was any possibility that we could put a speed something or limit up there. I don't know. I didn't say anything. I just told them I'd bring it to the meeting because I guess it's getting to the point where some people who live up there are going down so quickly that it's pushing people who are up there like off the road into that ditch. That is not a good ditch to be in.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's news to me, so I will definitely look into it.
I know one of it happened today, so it would have been very recent.
So to fall outside, was a question that came up last week. So if we fall outside the state parameters on any speed control issues, is it and you're new to the state, but is it required that we have a traffic study to lessen the speeds?
I don't know. I know if you want to lessen the speed, let's just say, the speed limit was 50 out on Highway 30, and you wanted to lessen that to 30, they would have to pay for a study and do that. I don't know if we would have to do that. Vice versa. We would have to, I don't know if they would pay for some of that. I'm not sure in town, as far as school zone specific, I would assume that we wouldn't have to do a study if we were changing speed.
Well, anyway, do you know, Alex?
Yeah, Mayor, I've had that case, and there's a statute on it that says you have to have a safety and traffic study done before you can lower a speed limit from the state established standard.
And the state established standard is 30, right? I believe.
Whatever it is out there. Mine was in the town of Burns, where the main streets state, they dropped the speed limit from the standard 30 to 25. And, I was on the dark side at the time, and Devin Davis's kid got a ticket and I beat it. So, and that was the reason why. And the judge said, yep, you guys can do a traffic study, you can't have a lower speed limit.
That's what I was afraid of, but yes, thank you for the update. So to your point, I think we need to, I'm not sure where we're left, cause 30 would be crazy
Oh,
fast.
goodness,
So
that's,
way
that's
too
fine
fast.
on
That's
that.
So I don't,
But it sounds like the people who are going on that road sometimes are going crazy, dangerous, fast. And
maybe we look into what one of
Yeah.
those studies entails.
Okay.
Cause I'm not sure we have our ducks in a row on a couple other streets in town.
well, that particular road's very narrow, so I don't know if that would change anything.
Well,
It's
it's
basically a,
The
yeah.
corners that they're probably talking
What?
about is kind of line, well,
Yeah.
when you're coming around, it might not be
True.
necessarily
At some
the
point,
speed
yeah.
as if they're just taking up the entire road.
It's technically not a
Yeah,
town street.
Then you're gonna have to sit up there and enforce it if it's.
Isn't it technically not a town street until you get to the curb?
Mhm. That's
The
the other
curb.
issue with that. That's
Now you're
the problem
listing
with
a
that road.
whole other layer
Yeah.
of problems we have.
Just
Like the
before you
private
get too
residents
far,
could
it's-
take that,
Yeah,
to be honest, that's not a terrible
Yeah.
approach. I don't know how you could ever enforce it,
Yeah.
but
Pitchforks
certainly.
and torches.
But your point is well taken, that that's a pretty sketchy area right through there to be going very fast.
Yeah.
Because then at what point, if we try to enforce the speed and we are then assuming responsibility for a road that is not ours, and then more will be expected and has been expected in the past, which would be great if we could, provide a better road going up that hill, but it would require all the property owners to be in agreement on that, so.
You know,
Who maintains that road now? Curious.
And
Uh,
does that end at 10?
yes.
Who does
Yeah,
it?
10th Street is
So
where,
once you start going up the hill, that's,
there's no easement for a road through there. So it's private property technically,
Who owns that road? Like which different
the
properties?
private property owner.
Uh,
So
yeah,
a good
there's
portion of it would
a
be
bunch of 'em.
Thomas's on the corner.
Right,
They probably own to about the center of that road, and then,
And then it goes over to Jessup.
Jessup's
yeah.
on another half of it, and as you work further up the hill, it just,
Breaks off.
the property lines are, I think, roughly the center of the road, but there's no easement
yeah,
for that road, so technically, we try to do minimum maintenance on it, and I wouldn't even say minimum, it's just a tough road that
Yeah.
needs some investment, but when we don't
Right.
own it, it's tough to contemplate an investment.
right. I mean, we maintain, like, we clear the snow and things like that, but,
That's what I was kind of
yeah,
wondering.
yeah.
More of a courtesy though.
Tricky.
Anything else, Jen?
Nope.
Dave,
I have nothing new to report.
Ally?
A couple things, from the EMS crew. Pat sent along some information. 9 calls total in August, 7 in town and 2 in the county fire district. They have completed the training for the advanced EMT class. And it looks like all 9 of them enrolled in the class passed the hands-on portion of the exam, which means those 9 will go on to do their, written exam at LCCC. So he was hoping, that in late October, they could do, a patch ceremony, maybe even at the council meeting at our end of October 1. And then I have a couple things from Wham, but mostly the most important thing is that Justin Schilling is working on that statewide training for special districts and elected officials. He should have an online module. He's hoping to be up and running by October, and that would be module-based program, which is like 7 one-hour modules. And at the end of each 1 hour video that you watch, you just like have a QR code and it asks you maybe 3 to 5 questions, just to make sure that you weren't mowing the lawn or like you just left it running in the background and you went to do something else. So he should have that up and running by October. I imagine he'll kick something out to all of us as he gets that live. But he's been putting in a lot of work on that. And the only other thing I had from Wham was that we discussed our possible charter change, and Justin was going to reach out to the network of other municipalities to see if anyone had changed their charter for election dates. And he's just forgotten about it. He said he couldn't remember anyone, but he was going to reach out and see if they would help us, like, just send over their language and give us any advice. So that came out of our regional meeting a few weeks ago.
Great. Dennis?
Few things with the landfill. I don't know if you've heard or noticed that WyoStar has been in the news lately. There's the landfill has a substantial amount of money invested through WyoStar right now. There's 2 different WyoStars. There's WyoStar 1 and WyoStar 2. WyoStar 1 is an investment program that's slightly more conservative than WyoStar 2. WyoStar 2 has a fairly aggressive investment plan. And they recently had a large withdrawal that put them into a bit of trouble. And they had a negative return on some of the money they were holding. So there was actually some principal lost to some of the municipalities that had money invested with WyoStar 2, and that caused a scare, and so then they had a run on the money that was invested in there, and they ended up with like a negative 33% return on money that was invested through WyoStar 2. As a result of all of this, we started looking at other investment avenues, and so we listened to a presentation from Wyoming Class, which is also another approved investment firm. And everything that I heard, I was impressed with Wyoming Class. I think that they take a little different approach to the investing, and they keep a fair amount more money liquid. They claim that they could do a $100 million withdrawal and not have it affect any of their investment portfolios at all. And they also have about a three quarters of a % higher rate of return than either of the WyoStar investments. Next month at the meeting, there's a representative from WyoStar is gonna come and talk to us, so we'll hear their side of the story on what's going on. But does the town have any money invested through either of those?
We do. We have approximately $130,000 in WyoStar.
Which one, do you know, one or
one.
two? Okay, the one has been stable,
It's,
near
yeah.
as I know.
But I did meet with, Wyoming class, and, we talked about setting up a time when they could come out and, do a presentation for the council. Currently, our yield is, I think, less than 2% through WyoStar, and I think
They're like at 4.37.
they're right, very close to 5 at the time that I talked to them, so, you know, it's definitely something we could consider. You know, of course, then are we feeding into the current problem that WyoStar is having? Which is that, you know, everybody's kind of running for the hills, so,
Yeah, I was impressed with what they had to say, though.
yes,
WyoStar.
absolutely.
You mean of class or WyoStar?
I mean, Wyoming class,
Wyoming class,
I
yeah.
was,
WyoStar sent some stuff out to try to get in front of, well, not really in front, but
But, yeah,
damage
behind
control.
in front, damage control, and I mean, it's plausible. Like, there's some things that I think they know they've mistakenly done, and they seem to be very confident about righting the ship, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Even so, if you can get a better return
No, absolutely.
by moving your money, you know.
So that will be in an upcoming meeting where we'll have somebody
So
from
there's a
Wyoming class.
possibility they're gonna come and talk to us?
Yes, yeah, it's just, we're just working through the schedule right now to see which meeting would be best for them to come out and, visit with you all.
Well, anyway, so we'll hear from WyoStar next, and then we'll make a decision on whether to move our money or not move our money. And we did have some of the same concerns with, are we gonna further the run on,
Right.
you know, and damage WyoStar even more, but at the same time, you need to take care of your own interests too, so. And then another thing, the landfill has a new dozer on order that's scheduled to ship October 28th, and that's still on schedule. The landfill's had some safety issues that they're gonna try to address by buying a Z-lift so that they're not shuttling people around in loader buckets and that kind of thing.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, good idea. But, so, currently they're shopping for a lift of some sort, but everything gets more expensive than you think it's gonna when you're actually doing it, so that's. And they had one of their cat paddle scrapers down. Unfortunately, when they bought it, they ended up with about $53,000 worth of repairs done to it because they had to rebuild the transmission. But fortunately, when they purchased it, they purchased the extended warranty on it. So the repairs were all covered under warranty. So that's good news there. And that's about it at the landfill.
Great, anything else?
Nope.
Alex, do you have anything else?
Yeah, one quickie.
Yes.
If Ally gets any more information on the charter ordinance repeal, because we're kind of in that right now, so anything that you get, if you would forward that on, that'd be great.
I will for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Austin, you have anything?
We had our debrief with the county, state, and pretty much any entity that came out to our incident. That went well. We've looked at a few things dispatch-wise to try to change how we notify the school, point of contacts for that to happen, and a step-by-step procedure, for that to take place in, so that kinda everyone, especially dispatch, knows where to go and who to talk to, and that's who they talk to. Same thing with incident command. There was kinda 4 of us there, directing kinda that one point, so there's not 4 informations going around and at different points. But that was, pretty seamless on that end, and there wasn't an issue, but just directing, okay, between me and the lieutenant and sergeant from the county, what decision are we making? So to streamline that process. And then involving, contact phone numbers for, not only schools, but daycares and everything like that, so that we have all that, taken care of through the dispatch side as well. So that when something happens, they're looking into a, reverse 911, I can't remember the name of it, I apologize. They're looking into a, system to notify them through a different means. So they would sign up for that program, and that's paid through WildLink. And, that would notify them a lot quicker as well. And us at Incident Command or anybody can actually instant message, those heads as well. So we're all on the same chat board message. So anybody on scene, or not on scene, but anybody in Incident Command can see what's being said, who said it, and to who. So it streamlines that process. Speaking of WildLink, we did get a grant for new radios. I'm working with the county to upgrade some radio channels that they have that we need, that during this incident we found out we didn't have. And that's something that they're gonna pay for, just cause they have a guy on staff that does that for them anyway. So, that's something I work with Chance out to, when we get our radios in and up to snuff, we will send them over there and they'll put all our radio channels in there that we need, and some that we need for them as well. Other than that, I did wanna mention, we do have the, radar trailer, and that's something that we can put on 10th. While we look at how we can enforce that, we can at least put that up there, maybe get their attention.
That's a good idea.
Or, if we can talk later.
I would just mention to that, yeah, which I think is great, but just to be clear, we're putting it on private property, so wherever we put it, we need to get permission
Yeah.
from someone to put it up there.
I try the Thomases. I think they've lost a few cats to,
Okay.
Yeah, so where are we talking from? On 10th Street or East 10th?
I guess it'd be East 10th, technically.
Yeah.
Like when it basically becomes a dirt road.
Right at the bottom.
Where it turns into pavement.
Yeah, well, like, yeah, but that, like, where they're coming down from the hill and it's that blind corner.
Yeah.
And that, like, stretch kind of before you would turn again,
Okay.
kind of around the Thomas's house.
Yep.
That whole area, I think.
Well, if that's the
So
concern
that's their
area, I'm
house,
sure
and I
they'd
think it's
allow
this
that, so.
stretch, that's the concern.
And that would be a pretty straight shot if they allowed it to put us kinda at that retaining wall right there by their corner. We could have a straight shot and we'd be out of the way.
Yeah, 'cause, I don't know, can you, sorry, didn't mean to. So, sorry, their house is right here, and I think the issue is this stretch right here. Maybe this too, but I think it's coming down here off that really steep hill and this area. So I don't know if you could put it over here or if you'd want it there. I don't know, you know where it's best, but I think it's this area, 'cause I think the individual who reached me today, they ended up in a ditch.
there.
Down here, down here.
Up the hill,
You'd be good, okay, perfect,
Yep, and that's what I was talking about.
perfect, thank you.
Other than that, the conversation went well. And that's kinda all I have, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie?
I I got an email, and I don't know how many of you did, about the DOA, the Department of Audit training that they're gonna offer on the 24th of October. It's a virtual, event, it's 9 to 5. I signed up to host a group, so if any of you want or can, Renee and I are going to do it that day. Hopefully, if I get my email back saying that I got a spot, I haven't gotten an email back yet. So,
Me too, I signed up, but.
yeah, so if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to, but hopefully we can get that done and out of the way.
Tentatively, I might be able to be there, we'll see. Depends
They-
on take
They also said, Justin also thought that on their WAM one,
Mm-hmm.
that you could also host,
Oh,
where like clerks were maybe gonna do like a 1 hour watch session, and the QR code's good for everyone, like everyone can just snap
nice.
and answer the questions. And
well, if
So,
I don't get this one,
if you
then
don't
I'll
get
just-
that, you could
yeah.
do that
Well, I
too.
haven't heard back, so I'm not super optimistic, cause that's what happened the last time, so. We'll see. That's all.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Kim?
Speaking of Department of Audit, we are wrapping up our Department of Audit annual report and internal audit, that will be finishing up tonight after the meeting, and will be ready for your review, Mayor, tomorrow.
Awesome. Anything else?
No, that's been keeping me busy.
I shouldn't have, it's getting late, I shouldn't have hassled our engineer for so long. It took a while. Nah, I know we're gonna have something here, so announcements and meetings.
Okay, so because October 9th, Monday, is a holiday, we will have a meeting on Tuesday, October 10th.
at 7.
At 7.
So, as long as we're on meetings, when you went to one meeting, what was, there was some larger legal requirement to change something?
It's
or-
part of the Microsoft,
No,
When
when you went from 2 to 1,
Like meetings in general.
Is there-
council meetings.
was there a statutory requirement to change something about when your meetings were?
no,
And then, so not to keep putting you on the spot, but the second week of the month works better in terms of getting
It-
bills in than
when
it
you
did
have
when it
2
was
meetings a
first.
month, it doesn't matter either way.
Okay, so now my
So-
third thing is, I had 4 things. My third thing is, if we're going to have a conflict, it's primarily on a Monday. Are Mondays still the best day for everyone? Like, holidays are typically more of a conflict on Monday, but I'm just, literally, as long as we're changing stuff, I wanna make sure we kinda get it right.
Sure. So, originally we were the first and third Monday of the month. When we were going to primarily one meeting a month, I requested it not be the first Monday of the month because I would be probably not getting all the bills in time for that first Monday. So that's why we went to the second Monday of the month. But if we're going back to 2 meetings a month, it makes no difference what week of the month those are.
And we don't have to decide this tonight, I just wanna throw these 4 questions out to you, so when we make a decision to change, we're all on speed. So my 4th question is, this would be my preference, and so I should say it's a statement, but it's also a question. My feeling is that if we're going back to 2 meetings, whether it's the first and third, or whether it's any of that business, or whether it's Tuesday instead of Monday, I don't really care, but I guess my preference would be that we pick a common time. And my preferred common time is, for you folks as well as us, is 6 rather than 7. any, like,
Works for me.
so
I
I'm just
like it.
gonna,
Good.
I'm gonna throw all those things out there to think about, and next time maybe we can make a, you guys have any thoughts on any of those questions?
We'll be here when you tell us to be here.
Ally and I are like, well, I think you're supposed to be able to eat before a 7 o'clock meeting, but I can't do that.
I never do either.
Ally pointed out that she's like, yeah, but by the time they end, I'm kind of getting hangry and ready to eat.
I
So-
prefer the earlier meetings, I mean, so it,
That's why I was just wondering if, you know, I think we need to be respectful about people getting off work to attend the meetings and all of that, but if we moved it to 6 instead of 7, we would maybe complete it a little earlier in the night or have time for it to run on for extra time. I hope not. But something to think about is, so just to be clear, you didn't have to change anything. You just started advertising the new dates, new times.
Yes. We would advertise it differently with, I believe, in the WHAM book
yeah, we have
thing,
to,
we would
yeah,
let
we
them
have to
know.
publish.
I think Alex would have to confirm whether or not it's in an ordinance. If it is, I don't think we, I don't know, that was a few years ago. I don't remember if we changed it by
That's all right.
ordinance or resolution or not.
That's what I'm saying, I just don't think we should willy-nilly change it 5 times. Let's think about what, like, the best scenario is
Sure.
and do it all at once.
We used to be at what, 7:30?
Yeah, a long time ago, they were at 7:30. I think the later meetings were really looking at the history of Pine Bluffs and trying to support the ag community, and that many of the council members, you know, had duties that kept them out in the fields till late at night. And
I think 6 o'clock gives people an opportunity to get off work and gather themselves for the most part. But that's just an opinion.
To consider.
Or we could do like the county commissioners and have it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
6 sounds good.
6 sounds,
Well, 3 sounds pretty good to me, but I'm also,
Do like the landfill, 7 to 11.
yeah, no.
Those are long.
Okay,
Move to adjourn?
Second.
it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Al.
But you'll be
See you next
receiving that.